Okay, everyone, this is my spoiler review of X-Men the Animated Series Season 2, Episode 9, A Rogue's Tale. This originally came out January 8th, 1994. Make sure to subscribe to the channel if you love X-Men. I have an X-Men video that comes out every single day, whether it's a review of this show, movies, figures, anything X-Men. You're not going to want to miss it, so make sure to hit that sub button. Now, this is a huge episode for Rogue fans, and it really has a nice payoff to it because you've had this Rogue story of her backstory with Mystique built up slowly through prior episodes, and now this is where we really get centered in on that story. And like I've said, what I like about this season is having episodes that are about characters' backstories, like we saw with Wolverine, which you saw at Gambit, and now we're seeing with Rogue. So fittingly, it opens with Mystique, her mother, and Mystique confronts a tough guy in the rain, just like, hey lady, give me your umbrella. Like, that's what he's going for here because it's raining out. I thought that was really funny, and there's a nice shot there, even in old animation like this, where you get the reflection in the puddle of Mystique. I like that. And we get this iconic shot of Mystique in the dark holding this candle. It looks amazing, even holds up today. And it's cool to see Mr. Sinister again, but you just see his red eyes at first in the dark. And he's got a gift for her. And he says one day we'll ask for repayment. So that's always something important with a big villain like that. Never does anything for somebody else. There's always something he has to get in return. But he informs Mystique that Professor X is not with the X-Men. So he's like, defeat them and you can reclaim your daughter. So that sets up what Mystique's plan is this episode, and that she's going to be with the Brotherhood to do this. And they show up to this fair. It brings the X-Men out, and I love the Blob is just devouring ice cream here, and at one point he just throws it at Storm. But the big moment is Mystique showing up as Carol Danvers to Rogue. And this is really cool because I love they have the Ms. Marvel lightning bolt appear behind her throughout these visions and memories, and I love that it is what triggers these memories to start coming back. And because there's no Professor X around to help suppress it, now everything's coming back into the situation. Mystique knew that would happen with Rogue by showing up as Carol Danvers to get that going. But, you know, that downside with some of this Rogue stuff is that ear-burning screaming that they do with her character. It's still just pierces your ear. I almost wish they can edit it on Disney Plus and just bring the volume down just a little bit. It is so intense. It's still cool, though, because everything with Rogue has been the most dark in the show, and it has that horror effect to it, but just the amount of sound coming out of that scream can be torturous, especially if you're listening on headphones like I do. Now, Rogue is bugging out with these memories slowly coming back. She's having these visions of Carol Danvers that she has made in her mind, and they're haunting her. The only thing I don't like about this is that they have this monster version of Carol mixed in here, and you never find out what that monster is, and it's just showing her as a monster. But I'd rather they have just left that. I don't like that it implies that she's also kind of a monster in this story. I think it just really doesn't add anything, and you could have just kept it as Carol, the vision that Rogue is making her mind herself, than having it sometimes switch to this weird lizard monster with no explanation of that. But this vision of Carol telling her that she's been in the lower depth of her mind where she put her, and I wanted to see what you had done. You took my life away. So it's very cool to see Carol Danvers here. And remember, too, you can't confuse yourself with MCU because you know her as Captain Marvel. But, you know, from the comics, Carol Danvers was first Ms. Marvel, and there's different versions of Ms. Marvel. So don't confuse it either with Kamala Khan, different Ms. Marvel. But it also gets you excited for the new show, X-Men 97, hoping that maybe they can do an updated version of Captain Marvel with Brie Larson doing the voice and the animation kind of looking like her. That'd be kind of cool. There's so many characters they can kind of bring into the MCU to kind of bring both universes maybe together. I think that'd be kind of sick. Or they start maybe an MCU animated universe from X-Men 97. They just extend it more. We'll see. But it's very cool seeing this older iteration of Ms. Marvel in a 90s show appearing like this. Now you see Rogue at one point is having amnesia, saying like, who are you people, to Jean and Cyclops, and she also at one point loses her accent, which I thought was really interesting. But this is where the importance of Jean is shown, which I really like. This was my favorite episode of actually Jean so far in the show, and that she really shines when Professor X isn't around, and that they can kind of show her using the next closest thing to being like Professor X and probing minds and helping Rogue through this. And when she probes her mind, she sees another presence in there, and I love that Rogue just flies out of the building, destroying each floor on the way out. Like, who's paying for that, number one? And can't Storm just chill with her plants in peace? But Storm will follow Rogue under the Statue of Liberty, and Rogue is crying, feeling hopeless, without Professor X. So as this episode goes on, this is really like the darkest episode to date we've seen in this show. But the Carol vision shows up, is like, forget it, Rogue, you're mine now, and lures her to the hospital where the real Carol is. And she's like, this is where you put me. Now we learn from the nurse that she is a Jane Doe, and they call her Sleeping Beauty, which I love because the Sleeping Beauty tale, she can only be awakened by a kiss, and it's cool that at the end of this episode, Carol Danvers, our Sleeping Beauty, is woken up by Rogue touching her. It's also interesting, the music here sounds like Zelda music from like Temple of Time and Ocarina of Time. But Mystique on the roof of the hospital is now luring the X-Men one by one, turning into Rogue, and then turns into Storm. They have a little showdown, the Brotherhood, with the X-Men, and a great moment is when the Blob grabs Wolverine. He's like, eat some sidewalk, throws him into the ground. He's like, need salt. That was so funny. And Storm uses her hurricane to blow the Brotherhood away. But where the really important stuff comes is Mystique reveals herself to Rogue again as the poser Carol that appeared to her at the fair. And she says she was bringing her to Carol to show her the past that she buried away. And this is where Rogue touches Mystique, absorbs her memories, and where we get more backstory about Rogue that she's remembering while we're learning about it. You see her dad with the belly sticking out. He's got the trucker hat on. He disowned Rogue for being a mutant. And this is what led her to leave her first home. And this is where she meets her mom, who is Mystique. She taught her everything about her mutant powers, which I thought was really cool to see. I like to see that Rogue stole the power from Pyro and made it a puppy. That was cool. And I like the all-green Rogue outfit we get to see. But at this moment, she only had the absorption power of stealing memories and powers. And this is where, in the flashback, Ms. Marvel shows up to the Brotherhood, which is really cool. And Mystique's like, you won't stop me this time. If my guess is right, my daughter has a serious surprise for you. So you're getting the intentions of why Mystique even took in Rogue and used her to be a weapon to defeat Ms. Marvel. And you see through this effectively how when Rogue is told by her mom to absorb Ms. Marvel's power, she wants to stop, and she's like, no, keep doing it. And then in the present day, she's like, how could you do that to me, Mama? Didn't I love you enough? You knew what would happen next. And that's where we learn she absorbed Ms. Marvel's super strength and ability to fly permanently, which is really, really cool reveal. And that's where we also know that she had her mind trapped inside her. And that's when the spells had started originally. And that's where the Ms. Marvel vision says, you stole my power, you stole my life. And that's where she's like, for the second time, I had to leave the place I call home. And that's when he called out to me. And that's where we get Professor X. And he's like, mutant, I feel your pain. Let me help you. In order for you to heal, you must forget. And I love it showed Rogue still worried about Ms. Marvel in this moment before he was going to wipe her memory clean. He was just kind of like, I can't return her to heal her real body for now. I can only quiet her. But okay, a little convenient. You know, why not just bring Rogue to her in the hospital and have her just touch her? I don't know why X didn't want to do that. Now what starts to happen is, because she absorbed the shape-shifting powers, Carol's coming through Rogue's body to shapeshift into Ms. Marvel and flies away with Mystique, and Jean probes into Rogue's mind. This is where you get like the trippiest sequence yet, where they're in Rogue's mind, and Rogue and Ms. Marvel, again, this copy of Ms. Marvel in her head, are going at it that still keeps showing as a lizard monster. And Giant Jean comes here, which is really cool visually. And she's like, if you destroy her, you're both finished. And Ms. Marvel's like, you took everything I had. Sorry, doesn't give me back my life. But Jean saves Rogue by putting Ms. Marvel's copy into a cage. This will lead to the big moment where Rogue has to stand up to her mom, which I think a lot of people can relate to. She's like, you made me worse than a killer. And Mystique's like, how could you do this to me? I raised you like my own. So it's that nice writing where it's showing Rogue rebelling against her mother, standing up for herself, and the mom still trying to guilt her and make her feel like she's doing something wrong. But she holds her ground, like, I ain't your daughter, Mystique, not anymore. Really good payoff there. And I love the next day, Gambit whistles at Rogue, and he's like, I hope you dress up for me. And she's like, I'd like to someday, Gambit, but I'm spending today with an old friend. And that's where Rogue brings Carol flowers. And she says to the nurse her real name. She's like, her name's Carol Danvers. We were very close, while she's crying, which was just awesome. Brushes her hair. And what's crazy about that, when she brushes her hair, the little glimmer happens where that absorption goes into Ms. Marvel that was in her mind back into its proper body. And Rogue doesn't notice that happened. that it will just be she leaves, and then afterwards Ms. Marvel just smiles, which means she's back, which was really cool. It was such a nice ending, and it was big because it was Rogue making peace with Carol and being kind to her. Finally, them stop fighting. I really like that ending a lot. This is one of the best episodes of the show. Definitely has one of the strongest stories in it, and it really has a lot of fascinating stuff going on. Definitely worthy of 2 watches. I think my only criticism, it gets a little blurry and confusing with what's what, with again having introduced this lizard monster into it, and then what's the real Carol? Is it all just duplicated in Rogue's mind, or is that it coming up from inside? There's a lot of stuff like that it's just like, I wish they had just kind of made it less convoluted in that sense, but either way, I still thought it was great. I want to give this episode a 9.2. This is my second favorite to enter Magneto at the moment. 4 episodes of this show, but really thought it delivered, and especially for Rogue fans to get a satisfying conclusion to her backstory, but also a nice moment here to confront her mother Mystique that's been set up the past 2 seasons. Let me know what you thought of this episode down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I read every comment. I try to respond to as many as I can. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any X-Men content from this new channel, and I'll see you next time.